So this is our fourth and final TNT session, and it's our third year of doing these, and the highlight has always been this night, which is our Coaches Roundtable. It's a great opportunity for us to learn from the coaches. A few years ago, we made the decision that we wanted to try to extend the olive branch to the coaches and have better communication back and forth so that we can learn from each other. And this was something that... What? Okay. You're going to hear them in a minute. This is something that we had set up with the auspice of having an opportunity to learn from the coaches. So this year I'm going to turn it over to Adam. I will tell you just on a setup. The coaches all have handheld microphones with them.
Test.
Okay. For your questions, when there's questions that are
Marvin, can you hear me?
We're going to pass this microphone around. Okay, so that will make it easier. Now, that also means that for you in the back, if you don't hear something correctly, you might want to move a little closer. We'll ask everyone up front to speak a little louder, but it's more important for them to have it in the mic. Okay? All right, so any questions? All right, Adam, it's all yours.
Thanks, Scott. We're delighted to be here tonight. We have an illustrious group of coaches. I'll do quick introductions and then we'll get right into the discussion. First, we have Carlos Poindexter, who's the head boys varsity coach at Hayfield High School. 12 seasons overall, I think, at Hayfield, and his 7th as head coach. And he is a true warrior because he played for Brian Mitras. You would never know it the way he coaches, though, would you? So thanks for being here, Carlos. Mike Barbee, the head boys varsity coach at Fairfax High School, entering his 8th season as head coach and his 15th overall, spent 7 years at Woodson. And like last year, when we had David Houston here, we have another son-father tandem. He and his dad have coached together now for 13 years, which is pretty cool. To my immediate left is Amanda Baker, the head girls varsity coach at Langley High School. She's been there since 2011. Before that was an assistant varsity coach at South County. And she is a graduate of Mary Washington University, where she played basketball as a team captain and a 3-time conference champion. To her left is Chad Dawson, the head boys varsity coach at Loudoun Valley High School. Is it really your 15th year? 16th year, wow. For those of you who don't know, 2017 4A state championship at Loudoun Valley. He was an assistant coach there. He was an assistant coach at Hanley and in Grove City in Pennsylvania. Last but not least is our host for the evening, Coach Jody Patrick. She's the head varsity coach here at Flint Hill. She's been here since 2001. Am I correct? And last season you won your 300th game?
Yes, I did.
Congratulations.
I have not lost more than 300.
That's good. That's good. Jody and I have known each other. We were talking since our elementary school days back at Georgetown University. For those of you who don't know, she's going to get mad at me, probably throw something at me. But she played at Rochester, at the University of Rochester. She's going to be embarrassed. NCAA Division III National Player of the Year, and did that while establishing 5 NCAA records that season. So she can play. She knows the game.
Never met a shot. I had the green light all the time, you know.
For good reason, because it went in. I was saying earlier, when we used to play pickup together, my role was set screens, pass her the ball, and get out of the way if we wanted to stay on the court. It was not to shoot. I have my last name for a reason. So the purpose of tonight is so that we can gain an understanding from the coach's perspective about communications between coaches and officials. You know, knowing the rules, solid base, absolutely a foundation for officiating. Getting plays right, or another thing we have to do. But probably the part that sets officials apart from non-varsity to varsity and from regular season to playoffs to states to wherever else you want to go is how you manage a game and how you deal with coaches. And so it's been great for the last couple of years to get a group of coaches to come talk to us about what it's like from their side. I can tell you this, that if you sit in their chair, you do see the plays a lot better. That is a fact. That is a fact. So I'm curious if you guys would each make sure your red light's on. We've got some questions that we're going to discuss, and if there's anybody in the audience that has a question, or if there are any topics that these folks want to talk about. But what do you believe is one of the more important characteristics of a good official?
You know, what I find is getting in position. I think we trust that because you're doing nights like this and you're training and you're going to the summer camps and you're doing what you need to do, that you're going to make the right decision if you're in the right position. And just hearing watching the video and talking about the angles and getting wider and, you know, making sure that you're in those positions, I just want us to be able to see that, especially with 3, and I know that we do 3, the league that we're in, we go a lot of places that still only use 2. And so the angles are different, and we really appreciate, as in the ISL, which is our league, that the positioning of each official is you're in the right spot because we trust that you're going to make the right call. And so that's my view. You know, if you can get there and you're seeing the play and you got the wide angle, I believe you're going to make the right call.
I put down, you know, the integrity of the game, a safe sporting environment, I think is very important, and that no player or team gains an advantage. I think, you know, big characteristics for me that are very important from an official.
I think a characteristic of a good official is someone who can be that baseline of emotion, someone who's very even-keeled, because it's a very intense game, and we have fans screaming, coaches complaining constantly, the kids are working extremely hard, and it can get a very hectic environment, but to have that baseline, that person who's totally focused only on making calls, I think is very helpful. So I understand it can get emotional at times, but having someone out there who is so calm and collected, I trust that they're doing the right thing.
I think it was Henry Iba who once said the problem with referees is they don't care who wins or loses.
I had 2 things that I kind of immediately thought of this. One is being a good communicator. In games, we all see things differently. You're a different view than we have a lot of times, and half the time, as long as we understand the perspective that you saw, even if we don't completely agree with it, we can kind of understand it, or even if it's just the kids need to know why they were called for something. I think if we get that perspective that you saw, it helps with things a lot. And then the other is just consistency within the individual game. We kind of understand every crew is a little different. People might see things a little different. And Johnson, you could probably make a call wrong the entire game, but if you make it wrong the whole game, we as coaches and the kids will adjust to what you do. The hardest thing for us is when something's called one way for a while and then something else later, because then that's when I think we get the most upset, because we don't know what's going on. We know what's going on. We'll adjust to what's going on the court.
The only thing that I would add, because I was going to say communication as well, is when I like when a referee is talking to me, letting me know when, like, say one of my players is not doing something correctly. I like for the ref to let me know before it gets out of hand or before he throws a check at one of my players, so that I can try to rectify the situation before it actually gets to that point. So constant communication amongst the refs and myself is one of the biggest things for me.
Are there any questions from anybody out here yet? Okay. From a coaching standpoint, how do you want officials to interact with your players?
I feel like they should, when it comes to, so I say this, like if they're talking too much, I feel like they should give them a warning and let them know that they're talking too much, to quiet it down some. And I also feel like they should talk if there's a captain on the floor, they should talk to that captain to tell him to get his team under control, so that it doesn't get to the point where we're giving out techs and then or we're giving out unnecessary foul for everybody having the wrong impression of what's going on throughout the game.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that aspect as well. Probably something I would add to that is help and be a little bit of a teacher out on the court in terms of not every single call needs to be explained to every single kid, but if it's clear the kid's frustrated, doesn't know what they did, it goes a long ways of either letting us know what they did wrong or let the kid that they ask what they did wrong. Because again, they're trying to do the right thing. They'll adjust if you tell them, we're talking about the jump stop thing there. If they tell them that's not what they can't do, they'll try to fix it. When they get really upset is when they have no idea what they did wrong. And same thing on our side. If we can't at least explain to them too. So between one of us, we need to know what they did wrong.
Yeah, and this isn't me preaching to the choir, but if I have the opportunity here to say it, if you could speak to them like young professionals. We're trying to empower them to be confident in their voice, and while they're not getting paid to be basketball players, they invest so much time, it's almost like a job to them. So I know they don't always have the best attitudes, but if you could try to approach it as, hey, they're doing their job, empowering them to be confident when they do communicate with you. It goes a long way, especially with the young women in our program. I know when they say something to a ref and they feel like they're heard, their confidence blooms. Like, maybe I was right there. Maybe I can talk to my team the same way. So that's just a little, if you could. And for the most part, I will say you guys do that, because I can see their confidence change when they have opportunities to be in positions of power and they feel like they're heard.
Yeah, tailoring on what Amanda said, I would say, the respect thing is very big in our program. We emphasize that daily and hopefully model that. And I feel like our players, if they would say something, and I'm sure they have, that is not cordial or not respectful, I would like to know about that, because I will make a change. Because I will immediately sub them out. We have lots of those indicators, in our program. If they do this on a call, that's the tired sign. We tell them, you're coming out. But I do emphasize that the captain's job a little bit, and I guess one of the benefits of coaching is that we do get to talk to the officials. So, I think that respect factor is very high.
I think the warnings that are given sometimes, I really appreciate it when my players come back from a call or, there's a timeout or something. And I remember last year 2 players coming off and talking to each other. And, they weren't in a heated conversation, but I knew there was something. I said, what's going on? They said, well, ref was just telling her, to make sure she's, watch the elbow, the displacing and pushing. And I thought that was great, because that was done from you to my player, and then she helped my, her teammate. So a warning like that, I think is great. And then if she did it again, and, I can't remember if it was called or not after that, but it deserves a call then if she continued to do it. But in that game, it was a warning that you gave. So that sort of, refers to the respect also, because there was some respect that you had for the player who was doing it. You warned her, and she was helping out her teammate.
I would assume that each of you and most coaches pick your captains based on some rationale and some reasoning. It's not just picking them out of a hat. They are your team leaders, and we should treat them as such.
For sure.
Right. One of the things, Amanda's mentioned a couple of things, and I think one of the things we forget as referees is for a Friday night game, the amount of preparation and focus and practice you put into that one game. And obviously your focus is to win that game. And you've practiced Wednesday and Thursday most of the time. You play Tuesday, but you've put 2.5 days in of practice for that game. And we may have refereed a game 2 hours before that game. And we're coming in, and the only thing we're hoping for is no overtime. And the emotions are high on both sides. And you said our job is to be like this. And I think sometimes people get frustrated because we're like this, because you've put so much energy and effort into it, and we honestly don't care who wins. We just want to be able to get a beer real quick afterwards. Mike, you touched on consistency a little bit. I'm curious if anybody else has any thoughts on what your definition of consistency is as it relates to the game of basketball being officiated.
To me, the biggest thing is if you're calling hand checks in the first half, call hand checks in the second half. Don't stop calling them, because at least for me, in my teams, we're a very aggressive defensive team, and for some reason we're always getting called hand checks. But when it comes to the second half and the other team is down and they're trying to press us, we don't get those benefit of the calls. So that's my biggest thing about the consistency when it comes to that.
I see the consistency starting really in your pregame meeting. And I know that that's tough sometimes because, like you said, you're coming in from another game. But I think that the consistency will occur if in that pregame meeting you are talking about what, how the game's going, how the game's going to go in the sense of what your points are, the points of emphasis, how you're going to do it. So I really appreciate it when I see you all come in prior to, and you go right to the locker room and you're sitting down, and I feel good right then because then I know, okay, they're here, they've just had a busy day, tough day, they're in there, they're talking about the game, and that to me, I feel good thinking at that point it's going to be a consistently called game because you've had your chance to sit and talk about what the plan is for the game.
Well, I wrote down exactly what Carlos mentioned there. The hand check thing. If it's a hand check on one end, it should be a hand check on the other end. It should be irrelevant of the athleticism of the team or the opponent. Kind of the same way with the on the back call. We're not always the most athletic team, but if we're in position, and sometimes you see. So those are the frustrating things with me. If I see, every time it's on the back on us, every time for them, it was a rebound straight up. That with the consistency piece, I think is huge.
And just start to finish in a single game, as Coach said. If it's going to be ticky-tack from the start, all right, first time out, we usually address, it's going to be tight, guys. Hands off, or they're going to let you guys play a little bit, so be ready for some physicality. So if it's going to be the same the entire 32 minutes, I can live with that.
Hold up. Those are really important points. I guess from the other side, right? You have this action, right? So you see three pitches come on the court, you see Adam come on the court. Do you have a pregame with your assistant, with your team to say, hey, Adam's here tonight. If he calls 5 fouls, you lucky.
We're not going to be in 1-on-1 tonight.
Someone else might be there. Just curious, when you see the officials coming out, you pregame with your coach and say, hey, your team got definitely, that our mindset is like, you can play that game, you be aggressive defense, you got to be ready.
Right.
You have to come out there and say, okay, Adam's here, maybe we may be able to do X, Y.
For sure. So, when I always look for the first ref to come in first. That's going to determine the type of crew that I'm going to have. For some reason, I look at the first ref and then I decide right then and there what type of game is going to be for me. And we do make adjustments. So once I see all three, me and my assistant coaches, we talk and we try to remember the last games that we had where we had those specific refs, and then we just decide on what we're going to do. But we still try to do what we do, and then the hand check thing is big for me because I don't get the benefit of the calls. So when
That hasn't been clear.
So when I do see a referee that does call that a lot, I always tell my players and let them know, don't touch. Try to keep your hands up. So
Yeah, just to jump on kind of what you said, is we don't know every one of you well, but when you have the same ref a few times, you can start to get the understanding of, okay, get used to the way they call the game. So it might be, all right, I've had him a few games. He usually calls it looser. I will expect that going into the game, or that person calls typically a really tight game. I'm going to assume that. And it might not always be the case, but like I said, we will try ahead of time to kind of guess which way it goes. But again, if it's not the way the game starts off, we'll adjust back long as it stays consistent for that 32 minutes.
So it's actually something I wish I could do a better job of. And it's something I think it's one of the last things what we could do maybe to collaborate better between coaches and officials is I see your faces and I kind of know oh yeah, I had this guy in the States last year and he was good, but that's all I remember. And I wish I had a better system personally for after games, this was my crew and this is kind of how it went. And from your side, I think you can look up on the website oh, Amanda Baker's the coach at Langley, she's crazy. But it's hard for me to go and find all right, these are my officials. This is faces to names, so when I see who's coming or even the scratch list, I can better evaluate or provide feedback or be prepared. That's probably more on my end that I can maybe do some of this detective work, but it's something I haven't done. So to your point, I wish I did a better job of that, and maybe there's a way we can make it a little easier for me.
We use a dartboard with the officials straightened. Oh, I never
Do you call plays?
yeah, right. Yeah, very good. I never address officials with the players because I'm very big on no excuse making. An official never wins a game, never loses a game, those types of things. I don't think that I've really ever talked with our coaching staff about that. That's never really entered my thinking. I just want it to be, like I said, a safe sporting environment that is highly competitive. Would be an ideal situation. I do think it's important that the players understand that, and it's very tough when you hear when you hear parents in the stands, because a lot of times kids come in, automatically thinking, that they have an alibi, and we really nip that in the bud.
Teams have tendencies, referees have tendencies, and so that happens. But what I always teach my players, we have the ABC method, that you have an A move. Great. Well, hey, say that A move is not a move that's going to work because the ref calls travel on it. You better go to B. Then you better go to C. So it's a work in progress, I think, with the kids too, understanding that sometimes you're not going to get the call. They're human beings, and that's what I always I don't want to hear about the refs either. And I always tell the players, don't ever talk to me about them, and I'm not going to address it with the players as well. But there's definitely tendencies, and we'll see it, but it has to be consistent as it moves along.
So I have a question. Do y'all as referees, do y'all know the records of teams, or do y'all know the magnitude of particular games that are being played, in the conferences and things like that? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll answer that. We definitely try to find out maybe what the score was of the last game.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully, all of the coaches that are here give us the game tapes.
Yeah.
For huddle. Actually, and no offense to any other coach in the area, but Carlos is the best. Because I get the game video before I even get home.
Yeah. So do I.
It's there. And so what it allows us to do, especially when we get towards districts and playoffs,
Right.
is, I'll give you an example. Jerry sent me an email last year. I have this game district. Can you send me whatever game it is? So I would send him the game videos of that match. Now everybody has access to it.
Right.
So we've had some officials that are doing state games down in Richmond, and we'll call those schools to get the game videos so that we can scout them. So we know when you're playing Marshall,
Mm-hmm.
to focus on the Marshall offense. We know what kind of system they drive, right? So I would say that we are getting better at being students of that. To Amanda's point, you're on the website, looking at names.
Right.
You can get that. After a while, you kind of get relationships going. You don't need to do that. But I think for a lot of the younger officials or officials that are coming up, it's really a benefit to be able to. And some of your websites are great. Some of them still have 2014, 15 scores on them. So it would be helpful to have those updated. Yeah, I would say that we're trying to do a better job of being ahead of it and studying.
Do you select your crews based on a matchup?
A lot goes into selecting crews. The relationship with coaches, whether they can get up and down the court, quick team, and there is a lot that we
Okay.
I don't think even a lot of people use crews. If I get, for instance, if I get a turnaback on the game, it might take 5 moves to fill that spot.
Gotcha. Okay.
Plus you're scratching.
I don't never scratch anybody.
I don't either.
Haven't scratched anyone.
I think the other thing we take into account is, regardless of record, is making sure we understand what the rivalries are.
Right.
Right? So, Valley County, throw the records out the window, right? So we're cognizant of that as well when we go into a game. What's the rivalry situation? Any questions from out here before we keep going? Come on. Marie?
That's extremely helpful and something we can take back to the players, immediately. And I think knowing that little bit of information, they'll be like, okay, now I can talk and not feel kind of silly when I pull the ref aside. Like, I know what I need to say, and this is how they expect to hear it. So that's great. Thank you.
Wait for the mic to come. I will say that if somebody does ask, it says to watch the holding, and I'm at Langley, I'll say white or red to find out which team she wants me to watch when she says watch the holding.
Duly noted.
Careful what you ask for. You may just get it.
You know, the only challenge I see, and I thank you for that, but that type of conversation, and I think this was one of the questions, Adam, you had down, is when there is a conversation with you and the opposing coach, and it goes beyond, a little bit. That's where I feel like, okay, if you're going to do that, please at the next break or right then come down and say, hey, this is what we were talking about. I think that I would appreciate that part of things. So, yeah, and because that coach might be working you really hard saying, this is what I'm saying. Well, if you're nodding, I'm thinking, okay, I need to know what's going on there because then the opposite might be happening at my end, So.
I'm curious. Scott and I have talked about this a lot. I'll get to you in a second. And I'm curious as coaches if you notice this. So one of the things that when Scott and I have watched games, you see, we'll take an example. Hayfield's playing Lake Braddock. You got one coach who's not really going to get off the chair. You got another coach who doesn't know what the chair is. And the problem becomes when Carlos jumps up once. It's such an aberration from the way he's been the whole game that sometimes as officials we make a mistake because it's so different than what he's done. We address it in a way, hopefully it's not a technical foul, but at times we give him a technical because it's so disparate from what he's been doing for the whole game as opposed to the other coach who's been up the entire game. And I'm wondering if you guys have ever noticed that disparity, but sometimes we'll sit there and we'll go, uh-oh, here it comes, because you can just see it building and coming. And I'm just curious if you guys have ever, particularly those that don't say much. Chad, you're out of this one.
So I know for me, like you take like a South Lakes coach in Duggan, like he really works the refs, and I try to stay away from the refs. But the one time I get into that conversation with the refs, like I feel like the fouls don't come my way. I don't get the benefit of the calls. But then in the second half, Duggan gets the benefits of the calls. So, I still coach the way that I coach, and I try not to delve with conversations with the refs. I just try to coach my team to the best of their ability.
Yeah, see, my thought when you brought that up is that, boy, we got to focus on the 5 on the court, the 10 on the court.
Right.
Not the 13, really, though. The 13, the 3 are on there. But we got to really make sure we're coaching up our kids. And if some of it is a conversation with the ref, okay, but I think if that's getting into the weeds a little bit too much for me right now.
Will, you have a question?
Yeah, my question is related to your and that is the technical foul coach. Essentially, because when you call a technical foul, you all have to do what you're doing now, right?
That's it.
But when we do that, my question is getting back on the technical foul that you all have to do for the last technical foul, whatever. Do you feel that it was warranted from our group, or in some cases do you want us to give you a technical foul? How do you feel about technical foul officials?
All right, so I only received one tech from myself, and it was definitely warranted. But I knew what I was doing because I was trying to rile up my team. So that was, that was the reason. But I never received a tech outside of the one that I got on that film that y'all saw.
Well, that's why I try not to get them. I haven't received a lot of them, fortunately, but I like to stand up and coach and move up and down the sidelines and practice officiating. That's what I'm really doing. Trying, hey. That's gonna be my retirement plan.
Not very good. Any other questions? Yep.
So just kind of building up to those questions in technical. In some situations where things are being needed and you guys might be kind of blocking the technical, I think some key is officials to do kind of safety coming out of
Just let me know to dial it back. That's all you can say. And then, like me, I'm very conscious of what I say to referees because I'm trying to get the benefit of the cause. So, I try not to get on y'all as much, anyway. But I have a question about the text. If I get a text and I have to sit down, am I allowed to pull my chair up to the coach's box? Is that legal? Is that legal? Is that legal?
I do believe it says interpreter after your name. I believe it says interpreter after your name. Yes, you do have to get involved.
Yeah, you know how our
Their bench is a mile away.
yeah. Nah, just because you know how like in my gym we sit far back and then our coach's box is like closer to the court. So if I had to sit down, can I pull my chair up to the coach's box? Is all I want to know. I'm sitting.
I get to and my thought on the question is that just as you warn our players to stop the hold, stop the displacement, or warn us. I know that the only tee that I've gotten has been book tees. The encore tees have been my two players last year got two, and they both hurt games, and they took a seat. That was it, and they didn't pull their chair up anywhere. They were. They knew they were in trouble so I'd say just keep, just warn us as well if it's getting, and it could even be nonverbal, hand, just a look, something like that. I think anything verbal and anything nonverbal is I'd rather have that than verbal.
I think this is also is that we have different levels of communication skills and officials. We have some that are very open to it. We have some that are not so open to it. So I think there are times where it may be difficult for not everybody to be at, not everybody to be. Carlos and I joked about it in a playoff game. How do you plan this offense? The other thing is your assistant coaches and your captains, because we want to use them. We also have heard something coaches that said, "Don't talk to my kids." And so now it's a fine line where okay, well, we want to talk to your kids, don't want to talk to your kids. I will tell you that Carlos's captain, the last couple of years, Brian Cobb, now plays football in Maryland, probably my favorite captain of all time. Because I can just look at him and say, Brian, you got number 4 or do I have number 4? After it's 15. You have number 15 or do I have number 15? And Brian's like, I got it. So we want to use the captain. We want to use George. We want to use the kids that you are putting in leadership roles. So I would say that there are times where we also need that support from you guys as coaches. Maybe not you directly, to allow us to have that.
One thing I do want to add to that. So I know one of the things that frustrates coaches. Jody and I worked together for a long time, and there are some coaches that are paranoid. We worked with a soccer coach, Keith Tabatsnik. We were at a Big East soccer championship at Rutgers, and we went to a breakfast meeting right before the championship game, and they had the list of the 4 referees, and they gave us the guy in the middle. I'll never forget his name, Alex Ivanyenko. We left the meeting, and my coach was bummed. I said, what's the matter? He goes, we got Alex. I said, he's great. He goes, yeah, he is, but I'm 0-4 with him. What did he ever do to you? Nothing. But I'm 0-4 when he's in the middle. So coaches are a bit of a different breed, but one of the things, because we're all different people, and we have different ways we communicate, and some officials just don't know what to say when coaches say something, right? You may make a comment, you may ask a question, and sometimes they don't have the opportunity to respond, or sometimes they're not sure what to say. And what we teach is if you don't know what to say, you can't get in trouble for what you don't say. But that could come off as they won't communicate with me. So can you help those that have that difficulty with maybe what you're looking for, as not just a call, right? Because that ain't working, Carlos. But what kind of communication are you looking for from officials when you make a comment or have a question?
I'll start on this one. There are a couple of scenarios where I really, really hope to get a verbal confirmation from a ref that I was heard. And one is time and score. If it's a situation where I'm not sure why the time went the way it was, or I don't think the score is right, I think that's a situation where I would appreciate a ref coming over and giving me something. If it's me, it's a travel all game, I don't expect a nod or a confirmation every time that you heard what I said. But time and score, and if I'm complaining about a safety issue, like if there's a dirty player and you maybe haven't seen it yet, but it caught my eye right away, and I'm saying, hey, watch out for this, or I pull you aside during a dead ball to say, can you please watch 13? She is like hacking away from the ball. That's really the only time that I hope someone comes over and says something like, got it, coach. And that's really all I expect. The rest of the time, I understand it becomes white noise after a while if I complain over and over again, but those situations I really do try to get somebody to come over. And I don't expect a long, drawn-out conversation, but actually I remember with you in the Woodbridge game, I thought something was dirty, and I pointed, and you came over, and you didn't have to say anything, but I know that you heard me. And it ended up later, things ironed out, basketball karma played out, but I felt like I was heard, and I felt like if something happened again, he was on it. So just a little something to make sure in those situations I've been heard.
Yeah, I was going to say, Adam and I were talking earlier about the traveling call, and what's one of my questions is which was the pivot foot, because I really believe in teaching if you're right-handed, your left foot is always your pivot foot. We spend a lot of time on that. I got that from John Beeline when he was at West Virginia, because everybody's going to make mistakes, and if you can minimize what looks like a travel, even if it's not a travel, that's very beneficial. So we spend a lot of time, and I've been told, this kind of goes down to one of the other ones, well, I've heard enough, so that just tells me that an official didn't know which was the pivot foot, which can happen, and I'd rather hear, I just don't feel like that's warranted to be told right away that, oh, I've heard enough, if you didn't know which was the pivot foot, potentially.
Yeah, I would say if I'm making a statement, unless it's something, like you said, a safety issue or something, I probably don't need an answer. Half the time, that's just our way, I think, of talking to ourselves and getting steam off. If we ask a question, you might not be able to give us a full answer then, but if you get at least the I hear you or something, a nod, just some sort of communication that you heard it and at some point maybe get an answer, that helps. Like I said, when we make comments, I think that's just for us half the time. If it's in the form of a question, we usually do with like an answer of some sort.
I think it also goes back to the consistency, that if we see you talking with the one coach, give us the same, give me the same due. But, besides that, I just think, again, I don't want to do too much because I got to focus on the court and really make sure that we've got them in the right positions. And if I get too caught up in other things, then I feel like I'm losing it. So there have been, then I'm losing it for the players because I'm focusing on other things.
Is it okay for an official to tell you that they made a mistake?
I love hearing that. I teach the basketball is a game of mistakes. Everybody's going to make mistakes. I tell the kids that nothing diffuses a situation, I think, with me personally when I hear an official say that, hey, I missed that one. Or I'm like, I want to argue then, but then there's really nothing you can say. So I think that for me, I've probably given away too many secrets here, but that's very, very beneficial.
Same here. Same exact thing. I would rather hear someone say, I missed that call, or I'm gonna get the next one. It's like stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree, because then I start looking for makeup calls, and I'm like, oh, he missed that one, so this one shouldn't have been a foul. If you just admit it, I'll be mad for a second maybe, and then I'm like, well, we're all human, I'll get over it. Maybe later I'll realize that. But then makeup calls can become a slippery slope, or I can, in my mind, start turning things into makeup calls when they were actually the correct call.
Yeah, I mean, if you tell us like 50 times in one game, I made a mistake or I missed that, we might start to get mad. But if you once or twice a game, we'll calm down, I think, a lot quicker from that than try to make some sort of justification that sounds right, but more often than not, we'll see through those more than you just saying, I missed it. And we're like, okay, that's fine.
Is it a correctable error? That's what I need to know. No.
Half the people in this room couldn't explain that role to you. Me being one of them.
No, I agree. I think it's great because, as Amanda said, you're human, we're human, and I think if there's that level of agreement, I think we'll be okay.
Questions?
I just had a quick question. Year to year, we have changes in rules or changes in or points of emphasis that come along. I'm a little curious on your end from a coach's perspective, how much, I guess, preparation you do to be ready for that. Other than, I know you have the clinics, that and the other, or how much you're kind of expecting to kind of be more teaching to come from the referees in your early games of the season.
I don't put a lot of emphasis on it. I make sure to know the rules and then just make adjustments. If it's something severe, I will make adjustments. Like the free throw thing, when somebody's shooting a free throw and then boxing out, Scott called it twice on our team one time, and I didn't prepare my team for it. But after that, I started to prepare my team for that.
Yeah, really, I think depends on what the rule changes are in a given year. If it's a really minor thing that maybe happens once in a season, if that, we probably don't worry about it. But when it was the hand checking was the big emphasis. I know we spent countless time reteaching what was a hand check and not to the players.
And I think some of you have done the Thanksgiving tri-scrimmage that I've done for now, I think, 10 years with Oakton and Marshall, the Saturday of Thanksgiving. I've asked one of you to come into the locker room because we rotate, since it's a tri-scrimmage, one team is always out. And when that one team is out, they're in the locker room, and one of you's come in and talk to us about the points of emphasis. I always ask, what are they this year? And anything else that you think that we just did in the part of the scrimmage that you just refed, what did we do that we need to work on? And I know I do that with my teams. Marshall and Oakton took me up on it one year with the refs too, but I think I really like doing that, so I'm glad you brought that up. I just watched an NBA game, and I don't watch a lot of NBA, but I just watched one the other night, and it was the second game of the year, and they in the first quarter, 2 travels were called. It was unbelievable. I don't know if anyone saw that game. It was like and they said it was Hubie Brown, who I think is the best announcer, a color announcer, and he said, yeah, that's a point of emphasis this year in the NBA. And I thought, holy cow, that's great. Now, how long is that going to continue throughout the season?
That point of emphasis was called too early in the season.
So I think it's great, and I do put something up because I want the players to hear it too. And then so when it does happen in a game, they can't do as what I call my hands up rule. It goes like this to a ref, they're out. So maybe you've seen that in my games.
The tired signal.
Yeah, well, it's a tired and it's a what? And they're not doing that to me. They're doing it to the ref, and they're out. So if I see your hands up, I'm going to say you're out. And we just talked about that. The ref just talked about it with us last week. So I like the point and knowing what the point of emphasis are.
It's a little bit off of that topic, but just I think it helps you guys understand. You'll probably be surprised at how many rules even some of our best players don't know. Sometimes. Okay. I've had all district players not know that you have to get both feet out of the lane for 3 seconds, which you'd think they would know when they're 8. But sometimes, more often actually, they don't even know what rule they broke. And we try to correct as much as possible, but if sometimes they're dumbstruck, it's because they don't even know that's a rule.
I can't stand the point of emphasis thing. I don't understand it. I'm just going to be honest, because it's not like as a coach we're like, well, this year we're going to emphasize, our point of emphasis is going to be dribbling, or our point of emphasis is going to be shooting. I mean, you got to emphasize the rule if it's a rule. I can't stand it. I'm not a fan of it. I don't even understand where it comes from, but, you know, that's just me. You know, I think you officiate the game by the rules, and the coaches coach the game by the rules, and we emphasize, you know, all the fundamentals. So I don't even understand where that comes from.
What's the point of emphasis for this year? Is it? Is there a specific one?
Page 6, Carlos.
Page 6.
I haven't taken the rules.
Good job.
Many of them actually don't involve us. They involve coaching and like ankle sprain. We're not really getting involved with ankle sprain, but small contact, grappling. Uniform apparel, yes. And I'll say this: if you all are buying new uniforms, please send us PDFs of what we're buying. Right, that's outbreak.
Does it have to do with signage, or does it have to do with signage when you talk about the uniform? You know, logos. Yeah.
Any more questions out there? Yes, Marie.
Was it all three?
So deflection.
The play might officiate 30 years and never had this play. I mean, I've had it once, years ago, but it's not our rule set. Right, it's a play that you might go your whole career and
No, we don't need you. So let
goes
me
back
let
to
me
my point of emphasis.
let me switch.
One thing that I think will help coaches, one of the points of emphasis is about screening and having a foot on the sideline. You might tell your player, put a foot on the sideline so the defender has to go around you out of bounds. Well, if contact's made, that is now a foul on the screener because they're not in, they're only 2 feet on the court. And they're not, well, it's not legal guarding for the screen. It also, for the defender, if you're telling a defender, if they're tracking it to the vision line, put a foot on the sideline. They can't get around it. Well, if there's contact, now they don't have legal guarding position. So those are some things you might want to think about when you're teaching your kids. Or just be aware that if there's a play that looks like it should be a charge, we call a block, we say the foot was on the sideline, that's why.
Can we go back real? Let's go back to basketball for a second. The consistency issue. Carlos, you talked about, you know, if it's a hand check early, you call them and then you don't call them. Flip that around where it's something that we haven't called for 3 quarters. And now it appears in the 4th quarter. And talk a little bit about that for us.
Nothing pisses me off more when I see stuff like that, because, you know, 4th quarter is basically winning time for us. And if you see something that hasn't been called all game and you're calling it within the last 2 minutes, to me, I feel like you're deciding the game. That's how I feel. That's all I gotta say.
If it's an advantage-disadvantage situation, you know, that's going to be hard to look the other way. I guess that's the challenge I would have with that, even if it hadn't been called. Um, it's a tough one, but I would lean toward sticking with the advantage disadvantage.
So the first 3-second call of the game coming in the midway through the fourth quarter, it shouldn't be 2.9 or 3.1. It should be closer to 3.5 to 4 to 5 for the first one of the game.
3.5.
3.5.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that goes back to if the coach has been saying, can you watch 3 seconds? And if the official has warned, the players. Like, I have no problem telling, a player hearing an official say, hey, watch, you're in there too long, or, hey, you got to watch number 20. He's in the paint too long.
Yeah.
That way, if he's, if it's been warned, I have no problem with it in the fourth quarter. Or if a coach has been saying, hey, they're killing us by the guys being, because that's a huge advantage.
Yeah, I love that too. I do love when the ref says 20, get out the lane, or you're in there too long. I love that, because then there's no excuse.
For both teams or just your team?
Both teams, because everybody understands.
Based on some of your earlier comments, wanted to make sure it was a two-way street.
For both teams.
We have a lot of folks that just work freshman or junior varsity basketball, and I'm curious if there's something in particular that you look for when you're watching your freshman year JV teams, what you'd like to see from the officials working a freshman or JV game.
I think, Mike, you touched on it earlier. I think that the teaching aspect, I think it's so important, because I know here at Flint Hill, quite a few of my JV players this year are first-timers. They're good athletes. They play multiple sports, and that's one of the things we do here. It's not, I would love just basketball dedicated all the way through, but it's multi-sport. That if they're an athlete but they just don't get it, I think the teaching aspect for the younger ones and being able to explain quickly what the call was, why it happened, because you're going to get that look of like, what's that, and so being a teacher for that level is great.
I would say one thing, and this doesn't happen often, but in the lower levels we have sometimes managers or our parents, they do the clock and the score stuff. And in the last 2 minutes, the kids want to win. If they mess up, we want that corrected all the time. But I've seen games where like every dead ball the clock ran 1 second too long, it was fixed, and it just stretches that game on forever and ever. And we're fine with, we lose a second here and there because of, a 15-year-old manager is the scores official for a freshman or JV game for most of the game. And I say, at the very end of the game, let's make sure that game is finished correctly. But I'd rather save 20 minutes than have every second be right every second of every freshman JV game.
Yeah, I would say if they're reffed the same way as the varsity level, I'm totally fine with that, because they'll learn their hard lessons there when, records may not be as significant. So if you want to do exactly what is expected from the varsity level refs, the lower levels, I'm completely on board with that. They'll learn their lessons there.
Yeah, we emphasize, putting a winning effort on the floor all through our program, and I think that's very important, that it is officiated like, that type of game. We're the same. And on another note that Adam mentioned earlier, I guess because we're in Western Line, a lot of times officials will do the freshman game, and then they'll come over and do the varsity game. And that, I know it's human nature, but that's a tough slate, especially if, and it shouldn't, if there was something that happened during the course of that freshman game, now that doesn't get carried over into a varsity game, a grudge or whatever.
Any other questions? I'm curious if you'd each share a little, maybe a story with us where an official has done something that has really ticked you off. And you can name Scott's name anytime you want. We ain't that good.
I'll bring the page thing up, Scott, that you mentioned before we started here. So I had a 4-year starter that the entire time, she's our all-time leading scorer. This was the postseason of her senior season. We had finally started winning at this point. And all of a sudden, a lot of attention started to get paid to her feet, just her feet, because one senior coach brought it to an official's attention. And while I think it's great that the communication was happening across the board within the officiating community, I felt like she got singled out. And the attention that was getting paid to her, if that was the point of emphasis of that game, should have been applied to all the kids on the court. But it felt like before the game, everyone was watching her during warm-ups. I was like, man, if they're going to call it on Paige, they better hopefully call it on everybody, because I know about 4 or 5 other girls that are going to do the exact same thing. So that was one thing I think that it kind of stuck with me, and I know it kind of messed her up for a couple games. So just making sure if it's going to be a point of emphasis, so that's something that a coach wants to emphasize on one kid, all right, it applies across the board, because you've got 4 or 5 on your bench to do the same thing. Let's just not call out our best player, in the middle of the region tournament. Hope that doesn't get me in trouble.
I had one of our nicest kids, Josh Gramard. Some of you might remember him. He went on to play college basketball. He was just a really nice kid. And what made me angry is there was an altercation that happened on the floor against Woodgrove, a very, very aggressive, I would say, rivalry game. And he just came over to separate the two. I mean, it was very clear. But he was immediately suspended from the game. He was given a technical. He was on the floor. He didn't leave bench personnel, any of that. And that made me very angry at the time, but it was reversed, based on the videotape. So I think that's very important, because the kid was devastated. And, if you knew him personally, you would know that's way out of character. And I'm glad that, you guys reversed that, because it definitely was not warranted to be thrown out of that game. But I was pretty hot.
Is there anything officials say or don't say, or words we use, that you would prefer we did different things?
Nah, but I do remember a referee made a comment when one of my guys made a Euro step and he called travel. And this is when it first started being popular. And he said, "Go back to Europe." I said, "Wow." But that was one of the slickest comments that somebody's ever said to me when it came to stuff like that. I don't see him in here.
Yeah, if you know me, I don't really get all that mad in games. In fact, if I look really mad, I'm really, 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 really mad. But probably the one saying I can always think of, I've heard a number of times a year, is that I know what you mean, but the way it sounds just kind of annoys me, is when I hear "that's not my call," that annoys me, because every game there's at least one call where everyone makes a call that's not in their zone. And a lot of times it's the right call. They see a right call. It wasn't. So I know at times you will make a call that isn't in your zone. I'd rather you just say, if I can't see that from here, or I couldn't see it from where I was. I mean, I think it's the exact same thing you mean, but it sounds a lot better to us. I can't see it from my position, as opposed to "that's not my call." Like to us, that kind of comes off as I'm just rolling the blame to someone else.
Concur with that statement.
Hey, to piggyback off that, how come, like, if there's, like, say about when the ball's going off 2 players' hands, one ref sees it one way and he calls it, but say you see it and it's actually the different call, how come y'all don't confer with each other sometimes?
Well, sometimes we do.
Sometimes I don't.
Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we do. Sometimes it's, I need to know I'm 100% correct before I go in. Sometimes it may be, you know what, I think Scott might have passed on some contact that happened. If I go in and tell him maybe he passed on a foul, try not to put another foul in the book. It's close enough, I'm staying away.
Okay.
I was taught, I know the last part's going to be hard to believe, but I was taught or the second part's going to be hard to believe. Call the obvious, keep your mouth shut. I know that's hard for anybody to believe. And when the whistle blows, go get the ball. That's what I was taught. That's how I was taught to referee. Yeah, right. I mean, make the obvious plays. I mean, that's what everybody sees. So I think we do. On out-of-bounds plays, we'll provide help. On fouls, we typically don't.
You've used that with me before, and that's another very good diffusing situation. Like I could have called the foul before, when you've gone in with it looks like it could have been either person's ball off a deflection.
We'll say you had a guard a couple years ago, big kid. I think he was number 4, and he was a senior. And I love working his games because I don't know, he didn't get to play from the bench, and he was complaining, and you just flat out looked at him and said, "Shut the up, you're a senior, figure it out." And I just cracked up laughing because it was great. It was great to hear a coach say that to a kid.
He might be the one playing at William Mary. I don't know.
Any questions from out there before we wrap it up? Yeah. I hope it's not a timing question.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm up to from the TDOA Chronicle. I got a few comments about observations I've observed about the years. There's certainly a fight at the very end, and I don't think that for this intensity. First of all, I like what you're here. I like what we're doing. Communicating with coaches and officials is awesome. I like already touched upon about the best officials playing volleyball. That's how I'm going to play. When it's you, then you yell out to the player, "Hey, you got to move your feet on defense. Otherwise, we'll fall that all night." So I like that. But I don't like is another system here that like when you start complaining about how can we not make a call one in and then the call on this end. Now, then when it escalates 3 or 4 times down the court, that really puts the target on that. And I know you coaches, you're proud that you're a coach. You're proud of your school. You're proud of your team. You're passionate about your players. You're passionate about winning the game. We understand that. But I feel that these officials are very passionate about this game as well. And I like the fact that you are proud to be a coach. We're proud to be a coach. My advice to you is like, I really wish you guys would just close the game.
Les, ain't gonna happen.
Thank you for your time.
Ain't gonna happen. No. I think I do want to address one thing you said though, Les, is that when I actually conduct a pregame with my crew, the biggest thing is consistency. We've got to be consistent as a crew. That's what they expect, and that's what they and the kids deserve. And that's hard. That was the biggest thing when we went from 2-person to 3-person officiating. The coaches and the ADs were like, "You guys have a hard enough time being on the same page with 2 people. How are you going to do it with 3 people?" And so, excuse me, it really is incumbent upon us to make sure that we are consistent. And it's different. When I'm underneath the basket versus when you're underneath the basket and we happen to be on both ends, we may see different things. And that's what frustrates coaches. Because they do care who wins. We don't. And I think so that's why we're always going to have that kind of tug and pull in the relationship. It's how we communicate with each other that makes the relationship cooperative and collegial. We're always going to have adverse positions because whenever we make calls, I mean, we know this, 50% of the people are going to hate what we do, right? Even your daughter or your son might hate what you do. So we can never be too consistent, right? So I'm curious if each of you may have a closing comment, that maybe a piece of advice. Oh, what? What am I? You got a question? Huh? Okay, I saw like 5 hands go up, so I wasn't sure. Mr. Steve Gordon.
No problem. First of all, I want each of you to understand how important this is in terms of establishing precedent for the season, establishing the line of communication, because there's nothing so close to the game. One of the things I think we're talking about is communication is so important, but communication is key from one
Thank you, Steve. Again, curious if anybody has a closing thought that they want to share before we wrap it up.
I was just going to say, Ron Linden, who was a longtime football coach, he's in the Hall of Fame at Hanley, won a couple state titles there. He told me that was going to be the future of, interscholastic sports was officials. He thought that, this was in the late 1990s. So we do really appreciate what you do as well. To what the gentleman said previously, you guys only have to listen to fans during the game. We oftentimes have to listen to them the next day, the day after that, the day after that. So it's a double-edged sword there. But I do greatly appreciate what you do. Again, I'm just practicing officiating for my retirement plan. So if you hear me over there, that's what I'm doing. And Adam reminds me, I don't know what I'm talking about, but that communication piece is very important. He also told me, Ron, he's like, you can tell a kid anything as long as you have your hand around them. And I do remember one time last year, a couple of you guys having, when you're talking to a player doing that. I think that's very, it's also the nonverbal, because we can't always see what you're doing across the floor, but I think that's huge. Sometimes I don't do, a lot of times I don't do it, especially if I'm angry, but I'd like to get to that point as a coach that when a player comes off, I can still talk with them like that. But thank you.
And my one closing comment, I was a little nervous to come because I didn't want to have a target on my back of if I say something in this meeting, it's going to get held against me later. And I was talking to my husband, who also coached, and he was like, no, you owe it to them. If they're going to ask for your opinion, like, this is your chance to give feedback, and this is your chance to, actually better and strengthen that relationship. So thank you, one, for giving me the opportunity. And two, please do realize we appreciate you, and we know we have a good, well, I don't want to speak for everybody, but you guys are good at what you do. And I know that the breed is dying. Officiating is becoming maybe less attractive because of how people treat officials. So I want you to know, thank you for what you do and for allowing me to be here and not to suck up too much. I just wanted to put that out there.
Reminder, Langley, Green.
Yeah, I know it doesn't probably always come across from our end, but we do, I think almost all of us, if not all of us, understand how difficult your job is. And we may not always show that during the games, but behind everything, we do understand your job is very difficult. And as we said, there's everyone in the stands thinks they can do our jobs better than us and your job better than you. We're in common ground there, but we do really appreciate, because the games wouldn't happen if you guys weren't there.
I just say thanks for having me. I love the dialogue that we were able to have today, and I'm looking forward to get out into the season, and hopefully I get to see. I see there's a lot of new faces that I haven't seen before, so hopefully I see y'all throughout the year.
And ultimately, the work you're putting in, and hopefully the work we're putting in as practices start, will allow the play on the court to really be the biggest talk, okay? Not the talk that we have with you or you have with us, that it's going to be the girls and the boys working hard and really accomplishing what they want to accomplish. So, that's what I want. Between, 94-50, that should be what's going on for the kids. So thanks, and if you want to donate to Flint Hill, we can.
Clearly they need the money. Again, on behalf of the association, thank the 5 of you for being here. There is a commonality between officials and coaches, and especially in high school level. None of us do it for the money. We don't do it for the riches. We do it because it's our piece to give back to the game. And we have a lot of empathy for what you go through. We're only with your kids for an hour and a half to 2 hours. You're with them all day, and God bless you. So thank you very much for coming, and we'll see you soon.